José Campos, you are the chairman of the board for CIFOR, which is the International Center for Forestry Research. And in that role, you have probably a pretty good idea of the scope and the scale of deforestation around the world. I'm wondering if we can maybe start off by talking a little bit about how great this problem is, how you can kind of quantify it for us.
Yeah, okay. Well, deforestation continues, unfortunately, to be a big issue with all the consequences all over the world, especially in tropical deforestation. Though there have been many efforts in the past, I think the first discussions probably came in the 80s, and that's when also there was the idea of forest certification that came, sustainable forest management, the development of criteria and indicators for the first time. I think that was a very good basis to understand each other about what sustainable forest management meant, the underlying causes of deforestation, which is basically an economic issue that some people don't understand in the cities, why deforestation takes place in the rural areas, remote areas. And this is very important to address, and continues to be a problem. A huge millions of hectares being deforested, sometimes it goes down, like in the Amazon. Lots of new initiatives, RED as one of those. But still, we are not actually being totally effective in addressing deforestation. We need to address it from different angles. Conservation is one, promoting sustainable forest management is another one, increasing productivity in agricultural areas is another one, and actually understanding that this all happens in landscapes. And I think this is a really good progress in the last few years, that the world is talking about landscape approaches, where we bring the different sectors, the different actors together, like it's happening here. And this is something that I think gives hope, especially like in this case with talking about investment, the investment necessary to really address deforestation.
The idea of mixing forest preservation or reforestation and agriculture, so that there will be around the edges or within the forest sometimes some agriculture. That seems to be a sort of a newer way of looking at how we can do reforestation and meet some of the goals that we have to stop cutting down trees. Costa Rica, which is where you're based, has quite a good reputation for conservation, for taking care of the forest, and for utilizing in many ways its natural resources for other sectors such as tourism and so on and so forth. Could you talk a little bit about what you see as the good news stories in Costa Rica? What seems to be working and why, and just briefly in terms of keeping forest intact or reforesting?
Yes, Costa Rica was at some point in the early 80s, in terms of percentage, the country with the highest rate of deforestation. At the same time, was a country with a very well-developed system of national parks and protected areas. So the country was able to do it well, where you could put fences and put people out of the forest, but very poorly where you had private lands and people living from the land. That's because the whole paradigm, the whole level of consciousness, the economic model in the country was to promote agriculture. So forest had to be cleared to promote cattle ranching or agriculture in general. And then there were several policies that came in the country. Probably the most, in the late 70s, Costa Rica developed a first generation of forest incentives, including reforestation, but after a few years for forest management. and protection. And then a big development change came with the forest law in 1996 that created the payment for ecosystem services, which was the first of its kind in the world, which is a nationwide system where the government would compensate forest owners for the ecosystem services, the benefits that forests provided to society. And apart, in the same law, deforestation was prohibited. So I think that was important. So you needed that kind of law enforcement. No more forests could be cut, but at the same time incentives. At the same time, the level of education consciousness in the country on forest conservation. At the same time, ecotourism. Costa Rica at this time, ecotourism or tourism in general is the main source of income, and also at the same time, in the early 80s, the price of beef dropped, and this is an important factor from another sector. So cattle ranching became less attractive. So you need to put all of that together. And so it's, as I always say, I think you need three areas. You need to provide the incentives, you need to provide the education, the level of consciousness, but you also need to do the law enforcement. It's three things at the same time. And so Costa Rica, whose forest cover went down to about 1/4 of the country, now is over half of the countries with forest cover, which is a very successful aspect, thing for the country, which is incorporated in the economic activities like ecotourism, but still I think there is some work to do in terms of promoting more sustainable forest management, because having more than half of the country under natural forest, half of that is in protected areas, but the other half could be actually incorporated in the forest economy. I think is not all of that could be just an area that could not be touched. I believe that sustainable forest management could provide more economic benefits to the society in Costa Rica and global society as well.
That's very interesting. Thank you so much for describing all of that. That does sound like a very interesting look at the future and what could be done, and also looking at the example of Costa Rica. Thank you very much.